So good afternoon, members of the Assembly. It's nice to see you all up there. I'm Corey Johnson, Speaker of the New York City Council. I'm here to speak about the need to protect and expand the number of rent-regulated units in New York City's housing stock. The power to enact sweeping protections in New York City's rent laws rests with the state, and I urge all of our colleagues in Albany to take robust legislative action to extend tenant protections to renters who make up nearly 2/3 of the city's population. I have been a longtime advocate for tenants beginning before I ran for elected office, and affordability is perhaps the biggest issue we are facing right now as a city, and the steps we take to combat this problem will define the type of city we have for years to come. We must get this right. Under current state law, landlords have a number of mechanisms they can use to raise rents in rent-regulated apartments. First, when a rent-regulated apartment becomes vacant, the landlord can raise the rent by 20%. Second, when the owner completes a major capital improvement, or MCI, required for the operation, preservation, or maintenance of a building, the owner may increase the rent on each apartment to cover the cost of the improvement, and the increase becomes a permanent part of the legal regulated rent. And third, when the owner of a rent-regulated apartment either installs a new appliance or makes an improvement to an apartment, which is known as an individual apartment improvement, or IAI, the owner can raise the rent on the apartment by 1/40th or 1/60th of the cost of those improvements. I tell you all this because you know that unscrupulous landlords can take advantage of these methods to raise the rent of a unit until it reaches the deregulation threshold, which in New York City is now $2,774.76. And once the rent reaches that number, $2,774.76, the apartment can be permanently removed from rent regulation. Building improvements should be used to improve people's homes and stabilize areas, not force tenants out of their apartments. In New York City, we are working tirelessly to address our ongoing housing crisis by pursuing every available avenue to create and maintain affordable housing. However, as detailed in an eye-opening series published in the New York Times in May of last year, 2018, many building owners are working directly against these efforts, frequently using immoral and aggressive methods to raise rents and remove tenants entirely. These methods include lying about making housing improvements, crafting inequitable buyout offers for unwitting tenants, and harassing tenants with actions that threaten their health and safety. Another way some landlords game our system to their advantage is through preferential rents. Preferential rent is a rent that a landlord agrees to charge that is less than the legal regulated rent that the landlord could lawfully collect. And unscrupulous landlords charge rent-stabilized tenants a preferential rent for 1 year and then raise the rent to the legal regulated rent the following year, an increase that can be hundreds of dollars beyond the rent increase authorized by the local rent guidelines board. Those tenants who have been paying a preferential rent and who are then faced with an unaffordable and unexpected rent increase are forced to vacate the apartment. And once the apartment has become vacant, as I said earlier, the landlord uses the 20% vacancy bonus, MCIs, IAIs, and they can raise the rent on the apartment until it surpasses the stabilization threshold, allowing the landlord to subsequently remove the apartment from regulation. Schemes like this are part of the reason that we have lost over 300,000 rent-stabilized units from rent regulation in the city and our surrounding counties since 1994. And I look forward to the state stepping up this legislative session to protect renters. The good news is it can happen with many of the bills that have been introduced this session to protect rent-regulated apartments. Those bills, Assembly Bill 1198, which would repeal vacancy decontrol and retroactively apply to certain deregulated apartments. I know Assemblymember Rosenthal has been fighting on this bill and carrying this bill for years, and I'm grateful for her leadership on this bill. Assembly Bill 2351, which would repeal provisions of the New York City Administrative Code and the Emergency Tenant Protection Act of 1974 that permit rent increases after the vacancy of a rent-regulated apartment. Assembly Bill 6465, which repeals a provision of the ETPA of 1974 that allows for rent increases for IAIs. And Assembly Bill 6322, which removes a section of the ETPA of 1974 that allows for rent increases on MCIs. I could keep going. I think that we should open the ETP up so that more counties can opt in, and we can have further rent regulation and rent control across the state of New York. We deserve universal rent control in New York State. And I'm not going to keep reading the bills, but I'll end with this. In New York City, tenants in rent-stabilized units receive protections that tenants in unregulated units do not have. Notably, in rent-stabilized units, they can only be evicted on limited grounds, such as non-payment of rent or breach of tenancy, such as destruction of property. Good cause eviction ensures that tenants in rent-stabilized units can feel secure in their homes. Unfortunately, the protections of rent regulation do not apply to non-rent regulated units, as gentrification drives up rents and displaces tenants into unregulated units. Expanding good cause evictions to non-regulated tenants is an increasingly critical need. Another group of tenants that are in need of protections are loft tenants. Loft tenants provide affordable housing to many tenants, artists, and families. Yet many loft tenants are living in fear of an eviction notice because our laws aren't protecting them adequately. And for this reason, that's why I'm supporting Assembly Bill 5841 by Assemblywoman Glick, which would extend the application window for loft tenants while also preserving affordable housing units. As I said when I began, affordability is one of the biggest issues we are facing as a city. I firmly believe that by expanding tenant protection statewide, which means taking steps like eliminating vacancy decontrol, prohibiting evictions without a good cause, and protecting loft tenants, we will take huge strides towards tackling this crisis. We must dismantle the predatory housing practices that have existed for decades. And these bills that are highlighted today will help us achieve this goal. We need to remove any mechanism that drives landlords to want to deregulate units and destabilizes and displaces communities. And I look forward to seeing the action in the Assembly. You all have been leading on this for a very long time. So I want to thank you, Mr. Chair, for allowing me to speak today. And I want to thank all of my colleagues who have been leading on these issues for many, many years. Everyone who I see sitting here, some of them are Barnwell and Richardson and New and Mosley and Eichenstein and Rosenthal and you, Mr. Chairman, and Walker and Epstein and Blake and Joyner. And I don't know my Republican colleagues that are there, but I'm happy that they're here. It's good to see you. But at least on this side, I've worked with you all, and I'm grateful for the work you've done on behalf of tenants for years, and I look forward to continuing with that work with you.